a decade ago, some of the world's most prestigious and accomplished supercar manufacturers decided to apply hybrid technology to their supercars and create a new echelon, a new tier of hybrid hypercars. They led us to this trio of the McLaren P1, the Ferrari LaFerrari, and this car, the Porsche 918 Spyder. They all approach this with a slightly different formula, but the same end goal, to absolutely redefine what it meant to have hypercar levels of performance. And nearly a decade later, this 918 Spyder is still absolutely ridiculous. The powertrain formula that Porsche went with for the 918 Spyder combines a V8 with the hybrid setup, the electric motors and the battery pack. That V8 is a 4.6-liter naturally aspirated flat plane crank V8 that revs to 9,150 RPM. It makes 608 horsepower on its own, which means it is one of the best horsepower per liters of any naturally aspirated engine out there, tying the 458 Speciale. Now that power is sent via a PDK 7-speed transmission, which actually was pulled from the 911 Turbo and just flipped upside down and turned 180 to fit into this layout for also lower center of gravity. That's why they flipped it over. Now, the other part of the powertrain combination is the hybrid setup, right? So we have an electric motor in the back that makes 154 horsepower. We have an electric motor on the front that makes 127 horsepower. So the 918 Spyder is different from the other two in that it is all-wheel drive. The P1 and the LaFerrari are rear-wheel drive only. All of that means a combined total output of 887 horsepower and peak 944 pound-feet of torque. Those numbers might not be quite as lofty and high as the P1 and LaFerrari, but that all-wheel drive means this thing is blisteringly quick. It can put the power down. 0 to 60 in 2.6 seconds. Also, fun fact, in electric mode, it will do 0 to 60 in 6.2 seconds, but I prefer the full power 0 to 60 in 2.6 seconds. In terms of exterior styling, I actually think the 918 is relatively more conservative, especially compared to the P1 and LaFerrari. Those have the crazy doors that go up. This has regular doors. It's still a mid-engine carbon tub construction. The overall, although I just said more conservative, it's got exhaust tips that point right at the sky and a giant wing. Well, it's unmistakably a Porsche too. From the 4-point DRLs up front, if one of these drove by, you'd be like, yep, that looks like a Porsche. Just like if a McLaren P1 drove by, it's unmistakably a McLaren. This is the spiritual successor to the Carrera GT, and you see a couple inspirational cues. A lot of carbon fiber. Like I mentioned, it's a carbon tub construction, and as the name suggests, 918 Spyder, all these carbon roof panels can come off for the open air experience, and there's so much carbon accents all over. The exposed weave, almost every body panel is also carbon fiber. You can option magnesium wheels on this. I mentioned the Inconel exhaust tips that just shoot straight at the sky. The big carbon fiber active wing out back, it's currently in race mode, so it raises up. You can lower it down. I also love the little arrow pieces along the side rear bumper there, also in carbon fiber. The other big accent touch for 918 Spyders is the acid green. You have them on the brake calipers here, behind all the lettering. Some of them on the interior on the piping was all the acid green accent. That was the signature cue for the 918 Spyder. With that, let's hop in the car, take it for a drive. We'll talk about the interior, what it's like to drive, how it compares to some of the other hypercars I've driven, and lastly, the value. All right, so we are on the road in the 918 Spyder. And as you can tell, we are in e-power mode, pure electric. Just hear the whirring of the electric motors. It will do 0 to 60 in 6.2 seconds in this mode. McLaren P1 had a similar full electric mode. I also tested that out. But that's not that fun. Let's go to race mode. Yeah, that's more fun. So let's talk about the interior first. Now, given the fact that this car is almost a decade old, I am still quite impressed with the technology. We do have quite a few screens. We have this touch screen here in the middle, a digital screen all the way there on the dash. We've got virtual displays within our 3 pods on the driver cluster here. Steering wheel has plenty of buttons on it. This main infotainment screen here, you interface with, there's a touch screen. We can also go through and, oh, that's, okay, this swipe thing is for the screen up top. It's got this animation right now showing where power is going. And then below that we have touch buttons and another little toggle switch for your climate control settings. Underneath this big carbon arch with all these touch buttons is just this big opening, but you can't store stuff there because it would just roll all over the interior of the cabin. We have the carbon race buckets, which are very vertical. They have very limited adjustability, front and back, and then kind of up and down. That's it. You just sit extremely vertical. Same thing in the steering wheel. The column just goes front and back. So I brought it close to me as possible. Had to try that out real quick. Had a bit of open road. Despite having relatively no practicality, the interior actually is fairly spacious. The P1 interior felt much more claustrophobic, much more race car-like, of carbon cell. This is also a carbon tub, but that one was smaller. We have little leather straps to open the door, lots of exposed carbon fiber that's beautiful, like everywhere. From the entire door pretty much is carbon fiber. You can see it across the dash here. We also have carbon fiber right in between the seats. There's just a lot of carbon fiber everywhere, and it adds to the whole race car, hypercar feel of this vehicle. The steering wheel is also a very important interface with a lot of different controls. We have relatively small little paddle shifters here on the wheel itself. They're not column mounted, they're on the steering wheel. This rotary knob on the right side here controls your drive mode. So right now I'm in race, but if I go back over to e-power mode, it'll turn off the engine in a moment, I think. There we go. Now we're back in quiet. You can toggle over to hybrid mode, and then there is a sport mode, and lastly race mode. And in race mode you can press this red button, which would give you hot lap, which is like max power insanity for setting pole position at the track or something like that, right? On the left side of the wheel, we have some buttons. We have cruise control. This has actual cruise control because Porsche. We have an M button. That is for selecting a manual for the paddle shifters. So let's use that right now. But enough about the interior. We want to talk about what this is like to drive. So obviously the 918 Spyder is going to be extremely fast. 887 horsepower, it's all-wheel drive. I feel like the engine in the 918 Spyder hasn't gotten as much praise and attention for some reason. Everybody just focuses on the top line power numbers with these hybrid hypercars, and the P1 with its turbocharged V8 and the LaFerrari obviously with the naturally aspirated V12 seem to get more praise and adoration. This is quite a remarkable engine. I mean, that flat plane crank revving out to over 9,000 RPM. Just in pure engineering terms too, the fact that it can tie the speciale in terms of power output per liter naturally aspirated, it truly is special, and it's a very different feel from the P1 mating a naturally aspirated, more linear power delivery with the electric motors for like the torque fill and obviously the overall power number. It does not feel insanely charismatic of an engine. It's much more just like mechanical. I guess it feels like a Porsche race motor flat plate crank V8 would feel, where it just delivers the power, it revs out, makes a noise, doesn't make me as excited emotionally, whereas maybe the Ferrari engines do that more. The turbocharged McLaren ones definitely add a bit more of that to it, but that's not saying it is not a fantastic powertrain combination. You can actually also feel when the electric motors are putting in the torque fill instead of the engine itself, right? Because it doesn't have low end boost and torque. So as you're revving up the engine, you can actually audibly hear and feel the electric motors, and it gives us this really interesting, unique dynamic to it. This also drives completely different from the P1, like very, very, very different feeling. The P1 honestly is a little scary. It was exhilarating, I had a ton of fun driving it, but all that power to the rear wheels, it felt unhinged. And at any moment, if you weren't careful, you could just loop it. This feels also raw, angry, powerful, but somehow more composed. It's gotta be the all-wheel drive, it's gotta be just the way the Porsche nature feels. It delivers neck snapping performance, like I had to hold my head forward. But in a more composed way, see him in a higher gear, and that was really just the electric motors, spooling in. Super unique personality. Holistically though, this feels the most livable compared to the P1. Now the Bugattis are definitely super, super comfy. Like after driving the Bugatti Veyron and the Koenigsegg Regera, I'm like, you could daily drive one of those things. They're like, one of my friends described the Bugatti as a really fast couch, which in some ways is actually fairly accurate. This definitely has more of the race car tendency. You hear more of the rattles and noises and rocks hitting the under tray and things like that. You have the carbon tub and it feels more race car like. But I mean, you could definitely daily this with much more ease, I think, than the P1. So in terms of pure excitement and just heart rate induced that type of feel, I would say the P1 wins, but the 918 is much more well-rounded and can put the power down much better too. That PDK is fantastic. The brakes on this do take a little bit to get used to. When you're full on braking, that was fine, but I've noticed a couple times if I'm maybe half pressure on the brake, it almost felt like it was going in between the regen braking with the electric motors and the actual carbon ceramic brake rotors. And that part I wasn't a huge fan of. I'm sure spending more time I could calibrate my driving style, my braking style, and I'd be perfectly comfortable in the braking feel of this vehicle. I actually really like the feel of the electric motors spooling in. I wonder if you can hear that through the mic. That's really cool, because I'm in 5th gear right now. Something else I noticed earlier when I was driving in E mode is, because it displays what gear you're in, even in pure electric mode, it was cycling up through the gears. I assume that's because if you want to kick on the engine and you're doing 70 miles an hour in electric mode, you can't just start in 1st gear. Oh! Despite what I said earlier, this can still deliver that exhilaration. The whole car just kind of went, and it went, wow, wow. Yeah, my heart rate just skyrocketed 30 BPM. I cannot believe this car is a decade old. I mean, there are faster cars now. Porsche themselves have been leapfrogging their 918. GT2 RS or 992 Turbo S, right, from straight line acceleration or on-track performance, would beat a 918 Spyder. Newer tire technology, they keep advancing it. But for a decade-old car, this is still phenomenal. This set the record. The Weissach package 918 Spyder did the Nürburgring in 6 minutes and 57 seconds, and a sub 7-minute time at that point was like, holy crap, that's crazy. And now these days, a 992 Turbo S, if you do launch control, yeah, that's like a low 2-second 0 to 60, and that's just only a flat 6. Traction control and everything is advancing. But this still definitely feels special. It's not nimble, 3,600 pound curb weight because of the batteries and things like that. They did put the center of gravity very, very low. It's like something like in line with the axles, like the hub of the wheel or something like that, which is pretty crazy. But I just drove a GT4 RS and that feels substantially more nimble. 992 GT3 feels much more nimble. This is a different experience. All-wheel drive, obviously, electric motors, the battery pack, the big V8. Takeaways are, it does feel a little more hefty. P1 felt lighter and more nimble. I still haven't driven a LaFerrari yet, so I can't comment on what those feel like. And also, I'm on the roads right now. I am not on the track. I'm seeing what this thing is like on just regular suburbs of Chicago roads, along with regular traffic. Visibility to the front and to the sides is very good, but to the rear is not good at all. We have this tiny little window that's flanked by those two buttresses, and when the rear wing is up, it eliminates half of that too. The backup camera is not so great. It's mounted very low on the back of the car, and the resolution is not great. So I'm using the mirrors a lot. Gotta be careful with a car like this too. We do have a front lift, which operates very quickly. Touch of a button, goes up, goes down, very easy compared to the McLaren where you have to like fiddle with the side little toggle thing and then wait 30 minutes for it to go up. That's a slight exaggeration, but it's very fiddly, and this is much nicer. And then we have this like chassis button that changes up the dampers into sport or normal. And then on the left we have ESC traction off, which I am not going to touch because not my car on the street. It builds speed so effortlessly, like a hypercar should, like a hypercar absolutely should. And now we talk about the value. Well, this is actually the most common out of the holy hypercar hybrid trinity thing, right? The P1, the LaFerrari, and the 918. The P1 is the most rare. 918, they built 918 of these cars. They were all Spyders, hence the name, right? So the roof does come off, whereas the P1 only ever came in hardtop form. LaFerrari had the coupe and the Aperta. Back when these were new, it was also the least expensive. Least expensive is still very expensive. Base MSRP was $850,000. Call it $850,000, $900,000, and you start putting in options, so they're about $1 million. But that still was cheaper than the LaFerrari and the McLaren P1. Regardless, Porsche is still Porsche with their options, and there are some alarmingly expensive options available on the 918 Spyder. Things like the Y-Sock package, which to eliminate weight, right, reduce weight, it's like 88 pounds for max track performance. That was an $84,000 option, so it's like $1,000 per pound. Yeah, that's a lot. And then liquid metal paint was a $64,000 option, and then that's without going Porsche exclusive and all the crazy different things. So these easily skyrocketed in price. But the one that takes the cake, the craziest option that I have ever seen on a car is a whole other car. When you were buying a 918 Spyder, you could have ordered the 997.2 Turbo S Edition 918 Spyder. There was a special version of a 911 Turbo S that you could buy only if you were getting a 918 Spyder. And that was like a $160,000 car. So, but that was like an option, essentially. You could check the box and be like, I'll take one of these as I wait for my 918 Spyder. So these, when new, 1 to 1.2 mil, with a car of this caliber and level, they're almost always a good investment. And typically don't hear investment in supercar, right? They depreciate. Not when they're like this. Market price for these, I see them selling between $1.2 to $2 million. They all have appreciated. I don't think a single one of these have sold for under MSRP. Considering this P1 LaFerrari, none of these hypercars sell for under MSRP. So is it a good value? From that regard, absolutely. Are people buying cars like this really super concerned? I don't think so, especially when they're getting them second market too, right? People who seem to buy these cars buy one and then buy 2 and 3 and 4. When you bought the 918 Spyder new, you also got access to like their VIP program, which meant first dibs on all the new special edition models after that. So you could continue to make more money because you'd be the first one to get a 911R or newer ones, GT3 RS, right, GT2 RS, and all of those cars also would be turn around, you could sell them for more than you bought them for. So is it a good value? Yeah, absolutely it's a great value. Compared to the P1, all the hypercars I've driven, the Bugatti, the Koenigsegg's, I've been in Pagani's. I also think it's a great value because it's the most well-rounded. I think it's the most reliable. I haven't heard of any huge problems with these cars. With some of the other hybrid hypercars, they've had the battery problems, and from everything that I've seen, Porsche has not fell victim to that. The hybrid battery system has been okay. The P1 and LaFerrari ones, I think when those go bad, it's like $150,000 to $180,000 to get you a new one, or the motherboard, or the charger, or something like that. It's designed by Porsche. They know how to build cars. Look at GT3s and Turbo S's and everything, and 911s, right? They just work, right? They just work and work and work and go. Hybrid mode is weird. I don't think I like that much, because when you have like a tiny little 4-cylinder hybrid and you really can't hear it and the engine's turning on and off, it's fine. But I can very clearly hear when the 4.6 flat plane crank V8 fires up right behind my ear, and it's really weird when it turns on and off. So I went back into sport mode. Some final thoughts on the 918 Spyder. This actually met my expectations. This is exactly what I thought it would be after having driven some of these hybrid supercars and hypercars, whether it's like an SF90 or the Koenigsegg Regera or the P1. I just figured it would be the Porsche take on it, right? Taking their fanatical engineering skills, the dedication to perfection, ergonomics, powertrain engineering, everything, I figured would come together and deliver blistering performance, but usable, well-rounded, civilized when he needed to be. I knew it would not be as nimble. As something like a GT4 RS or the GT3 would feel, because of the hybrid weight. It's got a carbon top. It feels, I mean, this is so cool. Such a cool car. The other problem is every hypercar you drive, or any supercar at this tier, they're all amazing and you want them. So when people ask, like, you have all the money in the world, what 3 cars in your garage? It ends up being 3 hypers. Like, I'll take a Pagani, I'll take a 918 and a P1. A 918 gets added to that list, right? But then if you put me in a Bugatti, I'll be like, well, this thing is freaking fantastic in every way. The 918 feels like a rattly carbon fiber bucket instead. But it's got its own form of appeal, which now makes sense why the people who have the resources buy 1 and then 2 and then 7. They want to collect them all. Distinct personalities, distinct takes on the technology, all fantastic in their own ways. The most Porsche of hypercars. I hope you guys enjoyed this review of the 918 Spyder. I thought it was cool getting to experience what this car is like in the real world, on the road, and also different scenarios, different road surfaces, going in and out of parking lots, and then, yes, getting on it, accelerating hard. Unfortunately, we live in the Chicago suburbs here, and it's not like we've got amazing canyon roads. I don't have access to the tracks. I want to get to that point in the future where we can experience these cars at the absolute limit. But for me, half the fun is seeing how it compares to the other cars in its segment, in its era, how it compares to the newer things, what it's like just normally living with and driving it around. Took it for a hand wash earlier today, using a front lift, going in and out of neighborhoods, things like that. Just like driving the 918 Spyder like I would drive a 911 C4S, which is a little silly, but then you get on it and you're like, whoa, what is this thing? What is this car? Someday I will get to drive this thing on a track. I will figure out how, or on a crazy canyon road at the limit. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.